The first question I actually ask you is when I first got to know the work, I didn't know who you were, and the name Ildiko Kovacs. Talk about the history of the name. Where does it come from?
Well, it's Hungarian.
Okay.
Yeah, it's Hungarian origin. And translation is there's no meaning to Ildiko, and Kovacs actually means Smith.
Does it? Smith in Hungarian. I thought there was going to be something real profound.
Something really exotic. No, it's actually it's Hungarian origin. I was born here.
Okay,
brought up quite traditionally.
And where were you brought up? Was it Sutherland Shire or St George area?
No, St George area. So I went to art school in St George. I started off there and did art certificate at St George, but in second year they didn't have majoring in drawing. For some reason I majored in drawing, so they sent me off to National Art School in the second year of my art certificate, and then I did extra year, which was my diploma. It became then. So I did 2 years at National Art School.
The show, 30 years of work, and it's a magnificent looking show. Some people have difficulties with the idea of abstraction, the idea of what abstraction means. And Kate's asked me, and it's something to do with the talk, it's specifically about the meaning of abstraction. And I've got this lovely quote. You and I don't have difficulty with understanding it, probably because we've worked in it for so long. And can you talk about, in comparison to something like classical music, you know, everyone understands classical music, and it's an abstract form. But then with abstract painting, people have more difficulty understanding it. Can you make a comment about that?
It's a great way to kind of come in for me, because I always think of my painting in terms of classical music if I had to talk about it. And I think, you know, it's that sort of non-verbal thing about classical music, that the same expression goes into painting. It's abstract painting. It's emotion, it's gesture, it's feeling, it's tone, it's colour, it's rhythm, it's everything that you get from classical music. Yeah.
And it's the interesting thing I find about classical music too, it's you immerse yourself into it, you can disappear into it. And I think the best of these paintings you can do that too, because they're large and you can kind of disappear into the field of them. I think there's a lovely analogy between that. Yeah. So do you start out with an intent, or does it just take you somewhere, that talking you have with the picture?
I think, I mean, that's a great question. That's sort of, because it's both, I think. You know, the intent is always there, but I think the intent is, it's almost, you have to drop the intent and drop everything. And again, Augustine quote, Peter, that I know you really love as well, is, you know, you keep working and you keep working, and everybody starts leaving one by one, your friends, your enemy, the art world, and then, you know, if you're lucky, you leave. Yeah. And so it's that thing of just building up a rhythm where, you know, there's some kind of dialogue that starts to happen with the paint just through the doing. So the process, or the depth of how far you can get focused, that the process starts to kind of dictate itself.
So it literally is a conversation? The painting tells you what to do? Because I find that with my work. Sometimes I'll be looking at it and it'll say, you really should put this there or that there, or otherwise it's not going to work.
It's not going to work. Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, you're talking to yourself all the time, which is talking to the paint, I suppose, talking to the painting. Which
probably sounds mad to these guys. Yeah.
And I went through a really difficult time, and coming back to the studio and working in that manner of just throwing paint around that youthful, joyful kind of way didn't make sense anymore. So I was rejecting everything I was doing. Every time I put down a mark, I'd wipe it off, and painting became absolutely painfully difficult. At the same time, Gary died, although I'd like to leave that maybe beside the point. But at that same time, he died as well, and he was my first gallerist.
Yep.
So I just wanted to, I guess, clean my palette and find a starting point again, or not again, but to find a starting point, and just reworking the canvas over and over and over, and washing it off, and nothing was happening. And in the end, I just sort of stopped and I thought, oh my gosh, and there's nothing happening. There's this beautiful atmosphere of just reworking the surface.
There is. It's a great picture.
And, you know, and the effort and the energy of trying so hard to get something, some kind of language to start forming. And that's why I've just feel very attached and very strong about this painting, because it represents a whole lot of things for me.
Yep.
Yeah.
You used the word, and you've used it in the book, and I think you've used it in the video too that's on YouTube, the idea of rejection in a painting. And I think that's a really interesting idea in painting too. Can you talk about that in painterly terms, more about what you mean by rejecting things?
By rejecting things, I think by rejecting things is what I mean is leaving the conscious. When you're if you're self-conscious when you're painting in an abstract sort of manner, then it's going to look self-conscious when you put the mark down, you put the line down, whatever it is. If you just find that moment where you're just sort of rejecting everything you're doing, it's what I was trying to say before, you almost get out of the way of yourself and you're left with something very honest and pure.
Absolutely. The reason I wanted to talk about this picture is because we talked about paintings having a conversation, and your work is not literal, right? It's about a journey, process, and the painting becoming. And this painting's called Cockatoo, and it's got colour that relates to the idea of what a sulphur-crested cockatoo looks like.
That's exactly what I was looking at.
And the other thing that it reminds me of is the call that sulphur-crested cockatoos make. You know that scream, that really screechy, strange scream? And it's got these this kind of staccato-y look to it. So the titling of it came after it?
After it, yeah.
Okay. Can you talk about the making of it too? Do you actually remember?
Well, it came pretty soon after that painting, the big void painting.
Yep.
And I guess it was the start of, breaking through to something. And again, I mean, I kind of wear my heart on my sleeve in the sense that, when something positive had happened in my life. I think I mentioned that in the video. We won't go into that. I'm sure it had to do with love, but
that's a great thing.
But it was something positive, and I felt lifted. My spirits were lifted, and it didn't make sense to keep sort of repainting. Painting these kind of grey paintings that were so laborious and so torturous. I felt quite lifted in myself. So just the mere fact that I started using these lemon yellows and whites lent itself to a shift.
Yeah. If the comparison with Gary Anderson, it's quite a dark, brooding thing. This is an incredibly uplifting, open kind of image. So that was the intention.
And that was the intention. And I wanted to get light through. I felt a lightness in myself, and I wanted the painting to convey what I was feeling.
You talk in the video about the love of Aboriginal painting, and that's something that we've got in common. I think for me, my breakthrough as an artist, when I felt like this is what I want to do, I want to make painting, was when I discovered Aboriginal painting in the early 80s and thought, look, as a white toast boy from Sutherland Shire, how am I going to make work in reaction, in sympathy, have an empathy to it? Was there a turning point? Was it a more natural thing that happened to you, the lining up of it?
Yeah, I think so, Peter. I think it was a really natural progression that I always say this, that I, through art school, through school, Indigenous art, Aboriginal history was never really talked about.
No,
so
wasn't.
For me, going through art school in the early 80s, or what am I saying, in the late 70s, first year of the 80s.
You can say early.
It was, we were looking to Europe, we were looking to America for our inspiration, our influences. And it wasn't until 95 when the warehouse that I was living in had come to an end. And, I made, two wonderful people bought two large works of mine, and that allowed me to go and travel a little bit around Australia, because I decided this is the perfect opportunity to look in my own backyard. There's this whole world and culture of Indigenous art happening here, and I know nothing about it. So I quite consciously wanted to find out more about it. So I lived in Broome for 10 months, used it as a base, and went out into the Kimberleys and looked at lots of rock art, and came back and just kept on looking. It was natural after that. I just wanted to look more and more at Indigenous art. It made sense to get my influences from here.
So it was a kind of lining up. Was it a lining up of your work where you were at a certain stage and then kind of finding their
and
work?
Interestingly enough, the line for me in my work had just taken off. So maybe subconsciously there was a relationship going on anyway, because so much of Indigenous art is very linear. I only just sort of speaking out loud, thinking about that, but
Oh,
I'm
that's
sure
fine.
there's something to do with that. But I also remember coming back from being overseas for 4 months in Paris, got off the plane, and I walked into the Art Gallery of New South Wales, and the Papagnatul exhibition was on.
Oh my God, I remember that.
And
show.
I did. I just nearly fell over. I just thought, what am I doing? Looking, you don't have to
Everywhere
look
else.
anywhere else for me at that point. And I haven't really stopped looking.